welcome to Fall Semester Wine School number 9. As everyone is joining, I will just introduce myself. My name is Kelsey. I am the Director of Education at William Chris Wine Company, which is a collection of brands, including William Chris Vineyards and Lost Draw Cellars, as well as Skeleton Key, Grower Project, and Yes We Can Wines. We are drinking today, so excited, the Malbec from Lost Draw Vineyards. This is a William Chris Vineyards wine sourced from Lost Draw Vineyards in the Texas High Plains. So if you are joining, we're not going to wait to drink today. So open your bottle and say hi to me in the comments. Tell me what you are drinking. If you bought this pack, if you're excited for Malbec, whether you're a Malbec lover, who you're joining with, where you're calling from, anything that you want to tell me in the comments. This is a live episode. If anyone's new to this, we can talk back and forth, whether you are on Facebook or on YouTube. I can see your comments here. I can say hi to Sherry. Hi, Sherry. Ready for some Malbec. Spelling forgiven there. Christopher, how are you? So in the comments, you can also ask your questions. Today, we have a very, very exciting topic. One of my favorite topics to talk about with Texas wine. But basically, for those new to this series, what we're doing is we're taking 30 to 45 minutes, probably 45 minutes, to talk about something that I believe we should all know about. Texas wine or wine in general. And the goal here is that I can help you get a little bit more out of every single glass, whether it's more taste, better appreciation for the wine, more understanding about how it came to be what it is, et cetera, et cetera. And we've had 8 different episodes now. So if you missed any of those, they're all recorded. You can go watch them on our YouTube page or Facebook. Today, a long day. I'm so ready for this episode, and I'm glad we finally got to this topic. I, of course, saved the best for the last couple of episodes. So this month, we're going to be drinking this Malbec. We're going to be drinking the Grower Project Sangiovese, which is from Uplift Vineyard. I am very, very excited for that one. This is one of the most undervalued wines I've ever tasted in my life. And then we're going to drink 2019 Syrah from Alta Loma Vineyard. And then we're going to finish off the entire series last week of December with Petite Syrah, which is a big, juicy, fruity grape that I adore. And that is coming from Lost Draw Cellars from Verasian Hills, which is in the Texas Hill Country. Awesome. Okay. Everyone's in the comments today. That's so awesome. And hi. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Kirsten. Welcome back. Will and Kirsten. I saw that. Mona, Julie. Hi, John and Julie. Michelle, is Ray there with you today? Hi, Carrie. Dewey and Carrie. Nice to see y'all on live. Catherine in San Antonio. Who has tried this wine before, by the way? Is this maybe the first time that y'all are trying it? I did pull some wines that hadn't been released yet, just for you guys who are joining me for some deep education. I do try and do that every time I give a class. Donna and Randy, hi there. All right. If you didn't pick up the wine, that's okay. We're going to talk about it today and talk about what it tastes like. So you're welcome to take notes on the wine and then try it another time. And hopefully you just enjoy it that much more. Yes, I did just pour a little bit more for myself. All right. So let's taste this wine together and toast to the last 4 episodes of Fall Semester Wine School. Thanks for joining me so far. I'm excited for the topics we have coming ahead. Cheers. How aromatic. And it's fruity, but isn't there such a stony, smoky edge there? This wine can use decanting, guys. It is really juicy. I don't know if y'all can see how light that color is. It's really, really light in color. To decant this wine, we talked about decanting in episode 2. I'm just going to pour it from glass to glass, swirl it up. You can treat your glass like a mini decanter. All we're doing is exposing the wine to oxygen so that it comes into balance with itself and so that it's not so tight. Right now, the wine is really punchy, really, really impactful, which is a great thing. But I know that there's delicacy hiding in this wine. And to encourage it to come out, I want to expose it to oxygen, swirl it up, allow it to settle down a little bit so that I can get maybe some flowers or maybe some herbaceousness. Let's see what's in there now. There we go. That really, really changed the wine. Now it's sitting a little bit lower. I don't smell as much fruit, and the fruit that I smell is really soft. It's really, really gentle and inviting and very, very alluring too. What are y'all finding in this wine? Do y'all agree? Disagree? Oh, yeah. The wine was really tart at first. And after just swirling it around and pouring it from glass to glass, it still has a tart kiss on the finish, but it's much richer and creamier on the palate as well. That is the power of oxygen and wine. If you missed that episode, I think that was one of everyone's favorites because y'all keep on coming back to it and mentioning the decanting episode. That was episode 2. So go back and watch it. Gosh, I love this wine. That tart kiss on the finish. Remember when we talked about food pairing? I said that that is a sign to you that your wine wants some food to go alongside with it. Something maybe a little bit fatty or a little bit salty will mellow out the tartness on the finish so that all you get the entire way through is really juicy, soft, very balanced wines. And I've mentioned this before, but William Chris Vineyards wines, when they're from a single year, single grape variety, single vineyard, often they can be unbalanced because we're not blending in grapes that taste like a lot of different things together to create a balanced wine. We're creating an unbalanced product that becomes balanced when you introduce oxygen and when you introduce food pairing. That's a very old world style of winemaking. And that's what we've done with this wine. Okay, so today, we are talking about the challenges of growing Texas wine. Now, Chris Brundrett and Bill Blackman are our co-founders. Andrew Sides is a co-founder of Lost Draw Cellars. They call themselves wine growers. This is because they believe that the wine is, everyone makes the wine in the winemaking process. You can't bottle the wine without making it first. But they believe that the real magic happens in the vineyard. And so this is where we're going today. The challenge of growing the grapes, which is ultimately where you grow the wine. Now, we've made a beautiful product here that is quality, but I think when everyone comes into the tasting rooms, the first questions that I'm always answering is, how is it even possible to grow wine in Texas? And that's the topic that we're tackling today. And I'm going to go over some of the misconceptions that I hear. The first thing everybody thinks about is it's too hot to grow grapes in Texas. We're going to break those down a little bit and talk about what the real issues of growing here are and then how we adapt to them. In the coming weeks, we're going to discuss my favorite topics. Next week, we're going to talk about sustainability and by extension, organics and biodynamics and what the meaning of natural wine is. We're going to tackle that whole array of topics. Then we're going to talk about tasting terroir. So we've talked about terroir a couple weeks ago. And we define terroir as all of the set of conditions that go into making the wine taste the way that it does, what's growing nearby, what the climate is like, what the sunshine is like. And it goes down to very, very small things like each vine is planted in a little bit different soil type with different access to nutrients, et cetera, et cetera. But what we're going to talk about 2 weeks from now is specifically how that impacts the final flavor of the wine. So what will you taste if your grape is planted in sandy soil and has a lot of sunshine? Then finally, we're going to talk with the Petite Syrah from Lost Draw Cellars about the wine from beginning to end, from when the vines were planted all the way to when we're opening it, and what the entire process is like and what changes during the entire process. I'm very excited, but today let's focus on the challenges of growing grapes in Texas. If you're just joining, we are drinking the William Chris Vineyards 2019 Malbec from Lost Draw Vineyards. All right, I'm going to check out these comments just to make sure I didn't get any more tasting notes. Yes, if you don't have the Malbec with you, please grab something. Water, if that's all you have, tequila, if that's all you have, or another wine is just great. Okay, so the reason that we are talking about the challenges of growing grapes in Texas today is because the Malbec that I chose, any Malbec makes me think of challenges in the vineyard. This is such a finicky grape. It's a high yield grape, which means it throws out a lot of grapes onto the vine, which is generally seen as something that can dilute flavors. The goal in the vineyard is that you reduce the yield, how many grapes are on the vine, so that you can get really concentrated flavors when you make the final wine. The other thing about Malbec is it just is so disease prone. It doesn't get a lot of protection because the skins aren't too thick. So it can be really prone to diseases or vectors that carry diseases versus a grape like Tannat or Cabernet Sauvignon that has very, very thick skin and can stand up to areas that have disease. You know, there's disease in the soil everywhere. So the things that you're planting have to be able to stand up to it. And Malbec is notoriously really, really tricky with that. It's also susceptible to things like frost. It can be really damaged with things like hail. In places around the world that are working with Malbec, they're actually pulling up a lot of it in France. Malbec is a grape that's used in Bordeaux, and a lot of it's being pulled up just because it's so challenging in the vineyard, very, very labor intensive. And so they're pulling it up and replacing it with other grape varieties. This does not mean that Malbec is not delicious. You can make an incredible Malbec if you can plant it in a place where the yield is controlled, or if you have the labor to dedicate to making sure that the grapes are thinned out, that not too many are growing on the vine, if you can make sure that it's protected from disease in areas where there's a little bit more maybe wind protection that blows disease pressure away. All of these things are considerations before you plant a grape variety like Malbec. So long story short, when I think of Malbec, I think of challenges, but I also think of how people are overcoming the challenges and still making wine like this out of grapes that are really, really tricky in the vineyard. So the way that we're going to break this class down today is into three different areas. There are environmental challenges, and we'll spend a good amount of time here because we're talking about planting and growing grapes. There are many, many environmental challenges that we have to tackle when planting grapes and growing them in Texas, especially with the goal of making wine. We're not just planting these grapes, hoping they ripen and then popping them in our mouth. We are then extending the process and coaxing delicate flavors out in order to smell something exactly like this. The second thing is political factors. There are factors, there's legislation, there are many things going on a larger scale that will make wine more or less accessible to consumers. There are also certain places where there are restrictions against what you can do. We'll talk about restriction versus freedom in how you can make wine and how you can grow wine soon. And finally, social factors. Social factors is always a discussion when we talk about wine because ultimately all wine is a commercial product. We are trying to sell it to someone, and the way that we can effectively sell it is made more challenging by the challenges that there are set before us with the consumer. So we shall start with environmental factors. But before I jump into that, just a reminder that you can post your questions, and I want to know what you might think the challenges of growing grapes in Texas are, or maybe you've heard that there's a particular challenge that we have. I'm curious how everyone's coming to this conversation. All right, so starting with a sip of wine. Oh, gosh, I love this wine. Okay, so the environmental factors. When someone comes into an experience that I'm giving on site, or they come into the tasting room, one of the first things that I hear from a group of people is that they've heard that it's too hot to grow grapes in Texas, or maybe they've just come to Texas in the summer, or maybe they live in Texas and they've walked out their door one summer and walked right back in because there was AC inside and not outside. Heat can be a challenge, certainly, but ultimately, grapes need only a couple of things in order to survive and thrive. One of them is warmth, which means that I would be more afraid for a region that's cold than a region that's warm. Without warmth, a grapevine won't ever bud break or put out grape clusters. Heat can become a challenge when heat spikes happen, but really, when heat spikes happen, the grapes aren't damaged. They just shut down. They stop ripening. So we'll have a week of 105-degree temperatures. At that time, the grapes are just resting. They're pausing, and all of the energy is then stored in the roots. When the temperature goes back down to upper 90s, the grapes continue to ripen. So the heat is not a damaging factor for the grapes. It can cause the grapes to ripen very quickly, but there are other things that we can do to not make that a bad thing for the grapes. We have a pretty short growing season because our grapes are ripening very quickly. But what that means is that we don't get grapes that are intensely fruity. We get grapes that are fruity, but then also showcase where they came from. They showcase their terroir, the nutrients they pulled from the ground, their more delicate flavors, often minerality or stoniness. So we've actually turned that into a benefit. If you can use the heat as a force of nature that is beneficial to the flavor of your final wine, it doesn't become a challenge. What is the challenge is water. Where there is a lot of heat and warmth, there is also drought, and without water, the vines cannot ripen and thrive. The most crucial time that we need rain is after a heat spike, because as the grapevines have stored all of their nutrients and water in their roots to protect themselves against the heat spikes that are happening, what they need at the end of that is water in order to re-ripen and start ripening once again. And that's tough. What we do is irrigate. And the way that we've chosen to irrigate is through drip irrigation a lot of the time. In some places that are at higher altitude, like out in West Texas, we can do some flood irrigation and pull water from the tops of some of the highest mountains in Texas and flood it down into the vineyards so that they can continue spurring on and ripening. This past year was one of the most challenging years for water. We got, I think, 3, 4, maybe 8 inches of rain in some places that we usually get 30 inches of rain. Ultimately, grapevines don't need that much water, but they need water at the right time. So this is a big challenge, and having our aquifers is very important, but when they are reduced, it's very unfortunate. Yeah. The other concern on the opposite side of drought is rain at the wrong time. And this is an issue, not just a challenge in growing wine in Texas, but around the world. If you get rain right before harvest, like we did this year, it can dilute the flavors in the final grapes. So the way to overcome that challenge is to get off your butt and harvest the grapes before you see that the rain is coming. And we did a lot of scrambling to make sure that that happened, that the grapes weren't damaged. Luckily, we have not just luckily, amazingly, we have very dedicated growers that are constantly watching for this kind of thing so that it becomes less of a challenge and more of just an inconvenience. We are very responsive to the weather patterns that we see happening, especially around harvest time. I'm going to check in the comments to see if anyone had a great question to add on top of that. And then I have 2 more environmental factors that I want to talk with y'all about. Oh man, good comments. Kirsten likes the Gilliam Gap Malbec. I love that Malbec. That is a weird Malbec. It tastes totally different than this, doesn't it? That's a really exotic, wild kind of Malbec. And this is very red and black fruit, spices, floral, more traditional for a Malbec. But the Gilliam Gap that's such an interesting wine. I love it with Asian food, actually. Donna was told that the drought actually helped the crops this year. And we can dig into that. That's a really interesting conversation. I wasn't going to talk about that, but now I will. And Catherine says she thinks the biggest challenge would be planting vines in rocky soils. We'll talk about that as well. I'm glad you brought that up. Awesome. And yes, Julie, you're right. Why would it be too hot for growing grapes in Texas when you have places like Paso Robles making amazing wine in a warm climate? Also South Africa, also Australia. I mean, there's so many places making amazing wine in hot climates. Spain as well, majority of Spain, and it's landlocked in the entire center of it. That access to water is hard, but yes, absolutely possible. Okay, so the drought maybe helped the crops this year. So what happens when you stress out grapevines is that we get reward in the final wine. Our grapevines, if they're not killed, they become stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Very true with grapevines. If you can stress grapes out as much as you can without killing them, they put out more expressive flavors. And this is one of my most favorite things that I found out about wine maybe 7 years ago that was just like light bulbs went off. And here it is. I'm going to share it with you guys. So when grapes feel threatened, when the vine feels like they may not survive, the reaction is that they want to make sure that the seeds inside the grapes get eaten so that they can live on, they can produce offspring. The way that happens is by convincing animals to eat your grapes and spread the seeds around the world or around the local area. The way that you can convince animals to eat your grapes is by putting out more exotic, aromatic, intense flavors. So when you have a situation like a bit of a drought situation, your vine will feel very stressed out and start putting out its most flavorful flavors. What this means is that we struggled to get as many grapes as we usually do this year due to the lack of water, but the grapes that are on the vine were extremely stressed out. They are going to be some of the tastiest grapes I think that we may have had in a long time. Situations like this, and this includes frost, hail, it includes anything that may stress out your grapes. Low access to nutrients in the soil, like desert conditions, that is all very beneficial to the final product, the final wine product. So yes, it can actually benefit the grapes. What it does not benefit is the amount of wine that we make. So this year, this vintage 2022, when those wines come out, you may find that there is less of some of those wines, and it is entirely because the grapevines just didn't put out as many grapes because of the lack of water. But they're going to be some of the best wines that you will have had at William Chris, potentially. That's a very interesting topic, isn't it? And Catherine, the rocky soil conversation. Rocky soil is fantastic for growing grapes. If you can plant them and convince them to start growing, rocky soil is not necessarily very nutritious, and the vines have plenty of room to grow around the rocks and hold themselves in. The biggest challenge there is making sure that the ground doesn't shift and the grapevines don't fall down. But rocky soil can actually do a lot of great things for the vines as long as the vines can get through the rock. So chunky rock, wonderful. Really solid rock that has no porousness to it, not so great. But yeah, rocky soil can be very great. If you've ever been to like Bell Mountain area, imagine enchanted rock. That type of soil you'll find it around the world. Rocky soil versus sandy soil, you'll find grapes in all types of soils. And as long as you're planting the right grape variety, you are set. So that brings up, not any single grape variety is perfect. This means every single grape variety, and a grape variety is Malbec, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, Chenin Blanc is a great variety, Riesling is a great variety. All of these grape varieties have something that they don't like, whether it's a soil type that they don't like, maybe they don't like to have wet roots, maybe they don't like to put out a lot of grapes, maybe they put out too many grapes and they don't make such tasty wine when they do that. Sometimes it's disease pressure. There are certain diseases that they will be susceptible to. It could be that they're susceptible to molds. Some of them have thick skins, and that can be good for some things, but also bad for some things. Or maybe they have a very thin skin, like Malbec, and that can be great for some things and also not so good for some things. So the trick is, and this is the challenge with Texas, is not planting just whatever you want. We must plant great varieties that can jive with the conditions that we're in. We look at these other places that are growing grapes in hot climates, and what are they planting? Hardy grape varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, Zinfandel, Sagrantino, Sangiovese, Syrah, Tannat. All of these grape varieties love a warm climate. In fact, they need a warm climate in order to ripen fully. And then on top of that, they have some sort of hardiness towards something else that's happening in Texas. And a lot of this is disease pressure. Now, first of all, grapevines are native to Texas, not European grapevines like the ones that we're drinking, but there are American vines that are native to the Texas area. So we know that there is some combination of factors in Texas that sets grapes up to succeed in Texas. What the trick is now is finding European grape varieties that can jive with the conditions. Hold on, I got a really good comment. Oh, never mind. It was a joke. Mona, that's funny. So the disease pressure here. The native grapevines to Texas are resilient against these diseases, but when we bring European grape varieties like Malbec over here, they need to be able to withstand the disease pressure that we have here just naturally. Some of this is humidity. Some of it is diseases that are spread by vectors like sharpshooters. They look like little mosquitoes. There's Pierce's disease in our soil. It reaches all the way over to California. It's very American. Pierce's disease is something that affects the way that vines take in water. It's more common up against the Gulf Coast where it's more humid, and less common as you go away from the Gulf Coast, which is why you find grapevines in a large amount up in the Texas High Plains, as far from the coast as possible. So part of it is just planting in areas that have less of this. Some of it is finding grapes that can withstand these diseases. Tannat being one of those. Thick skin equals protection against things like sharpshooters. And finally, there are certain conditions that you can plant grapes in where they have a natural disease pressure lifter. The Texas High Plains is a great example of this, maybe the best example that I have. You have low humidity over there in most months, but you also have a raised flat plain that has wind blowing through it, and that wind blows away disease pressure. This is a major reason why in the last couple decades, over 80% of the grapes in Texas have come from the Texas High Plains. That natural resistance against disease is much needed for some of the more delicate grape varieties that we have growing up there, primarily the white wine grape varieties. Black grapes have a little bit more protection against things like that. But the right grape variety in the right conditions is extremely important, which means one of the major challenges here is not the disease pressure, it's the challenge that the growers have to have forethought and extra thoughtfulness in where they're planting their grapes, the sites that they're picking, and all of these extra factors that roll into their consideration. Soil is a big one as well. There are certain soils that carry more disease than others, and sandy soil can be a great solution for a lot of this pressure that's found in soil. Kirsten, good question. What are the Texan grape types? Are any used in making wines? Yes, they probably are used in making wines. I know a couple wineries that do work with the native Texan varieties, or have at least before, but it's pretty uncommon. Most of the grapes that are growing in Texas that are native to the area are used for jams and jellies. The Mustang variety is one of them, and there are a couple others that I don't even know if I could name them all. But Yes, there are, I think it's something like 7 native grape varieties to this area. And they grow in the south of Texas, in the hill country, along river banks. I mean, they make really tasty jams and jellies, but not as suitable for making wine as the European grape varieties that are used around the world for making wine. Mona, yes, the growers are constantly watching the weather. Constantly. I check the weather every single morning. The growers are doing it like throughout the day. I mean, did something change in the wind? They're out in the vineyard. They're feeling the pressure in the air, the humidity. Yes, 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 yes. They're constantly watching the weather just for any shift that may happen. And part of this is because wine grapes especially are a very labor intensive product. It takes a lot of walking through the vineyard and checking on all the vines. As you walk through one part of the vineyard, you don't get to the other side of the vineyard for a couple days. And by that time, rabbits could have attacked and, created nests on the other side of the vines and started gnawing at some of them. But they're deciding a lot when to prune, when to chop off some of the greenery, the leaves and things, so the grapes don't get too much shade or get too overgrown. If you prune these vines at the wrong time, and it rains soon afterwards, you can set yourself up to have basically open cuts in the grapevine that then will heal when it's humid and get infected with things like mold. So yes, weather is constantly a consideration. Everything has to be timed perfectly so that you're not exposing your grapevines to risk. Yeah. All right. So let's talk finally in the environmental area about weather. And this, I want to go into specifically things like hail and frost. These are two major challenges of growing grapes in Texas, because not only do we have extreme heat and then freezes sometimes, we also have really unpredictable bouts of hail. And it's different every year, which means every year we have to plan for the unexpected. Hail doesn't typically announce when it's going to come. And if you have grapevines just exposed and golf ball or baseball size hail starts coming through your vineyard, it will knock off grapevines. If the grapes haven't budded yet and you have flowers on the vines, those are so temperamental and delicate, it can knock off all clusters of flowers. Anything that touches the flowers when they're on and they haven't turned into grapes yet, they can depollinate if they're touched, so they won't turn into grapes. So hail is a major factor. Not only can it knock off grapes, it can also create cuts in the grapevines. And I've seen Texas vineyards where you have the grape clusters below, you have a branch here that the grape cluster is coming off of, and then you have the leaves and shoots up above. I've seen vineyards where the leaves and shoots have these like crisscross cuts all the way down. And that is where the hail came through and just started pushing aside the leaves and the shoots, and they got damaged. That is all now a spot where disease can get in and the grapes can be damaged. Photosynthesis, I mean, let's go back to high school and middle school when we first talked about photosynthesis. Without the right, without the pores being able to take in carbon dioxide and access to water, and exposure to the sun, the grapevine can't photosynthesize, which means if you mess with any one of those three things, the grape can't go through photosynthesis. It can't build up sugars in the grapes, and the grapes won't successfully ripen. And when the hail damages those shoots and when it creates cuts in the trunk, it can damage either the access to carbon dioxide or the access to water and the ability for the grapevine to function throughout the process of photosynthesis. Yes, we're getting really deep into this, but that is one of the major concerns, is that the grapes can't go through photosynthesis with damage from things like hail. And then frost is another one. If you have frost going in through your vineyard at the wrong time because maybe it got too hot and the state of Texas decided to cool itself down by going through a freeze, can freeze the water inside of the grapevine. It can freeze the grapes on the vine so that when they warm back up, they basically fall to the ground. But it can also kill grapevines. That can be a major, major damaging effect. And part of the way to protect against this is to find out which way the wind is blowing and make sure you plant your grapevines so that the wind does not blow through all of your vines. You want 1 or 2 rows shielding the rest of the rows from that freezing wind that blows through. And you need to invest in additional things that are very expensive, like hail netting. This can be, it can be so expensive. I don't know the exact price of hail netting, but it's expensive to, first of all, buy the hail netting and then have to pull it up over your grapes and then pull it down when you want to harvest. Fans in the vineyard that stir up the air and move it around and make sure that frost and cold air doesn't settle on the grapes. That can be a solution. In France, you'll see big fires being lit in the vines when there's threat of frost or really cold nights. They'll basically light a bunch of fires in the middle of the vines to help warm the air around. This is something that I haven't seen practiced in Texas, but the fans in the vineyard are something that I do see practiced a lot. Sorry, give me one moment, guys. I apologize. I am blocking a user really quickly so y'all aren't bothered. Donna, you want to know a little bit more about grafting a grapevine? That's awesome. Okay, so grafting is what happens when you take the top of a grapevine and you take the bottom of a grapevine, that's basically the roots, the root stalk, and you graft them onto each other by dipping them in wax and taping them together. You can also just cut the top of each of them and wedge them into each other, and eventually they'll become one vine together. This is an amazing resource for making your grapevines more disease resistant, successful in different types of soil. Our conversation about planting in rocky soil, you need the right rootstock in order to plant a vine in rocky soil, and you can plant any grape in rocky soil as long as the rootstock is one that can handle that soil. So you would basically graft on whatever variety you want onto the grapevine rootstock that can handle whatever soil you're planting in. You have a lot of rootstocks that are used in Texas that can handle limestone. There's a lot of limestone in Texas, which is an amazing thing. It can be wonderful for grapes, but there are certain grape varieties that ungrafted don't like too much limestone. They can sort of shut down when there's too much lime in the soil. It's too acidic. So if you graft whatever grape variety you want on top of a rootstock that is really, really successful at pulling up lime in the soil and can handle that extra acidity, it can make your grape variety that you want to plant pretty successful. What a rootstock can't do is make your grape variety more heat tolerant or things like that. It can't protect against some diseases. If you have a thin-skinned grape variety, your rootstock won't necessarily thicken the skin of that grape variety. Another great benefit of a rootstock is that it can help you control your yield. So if Malbec is planted on the right rootstock, it will cause the Malbec vine to put out less grapes naturally. Rootstock is a major, major consideration, and most of the grapevines planted in Texas are likely on rootstocks. I couldn't say that for sure, but this is so around the world. Since we've learned about grafting, it is common to select your rootstock for the site that you are planting in, and then to select the variety that you want to work with, considering, again, the climate that it needs to grow in and the diseases that are available in the soil. The disease pressure that is in the surrounding area. I hope that made sense. Mona, is there a way to place a Band-Aid on the vines once the hail has attacked them? Yes, I'm sure that's possible, but it would be so labor intensive that I can't imagine anyone is doing it, because these people aren't working with, just 10 grapevines. They're not even working with just 100 grapevines. They're working with hundreds. Even a 5-acre plot of land that's growing grapes, which is a pretty small vineyard, it would be it would be so difficult to patch all of the damage that hail can do. If it's a small hailstorm, maybe, but you'd have to go through and find the cuts and work to patch them. Julie, that's a really, really, really great topic. Julie says, one environmental concern that I haven't talked about yet is the heavy use of chemicals in the cotton fields that dominate the high plains. And I think Julie is referring to specifically a synthetic chemical called dicamba. This has been a concern, a major concern in the last year or two. Dicamba is a chemical that was recently changed. It's used as a weed killer for crops. It's not just cotton, it's a lot of different crops, but it has been very useful for controlling weeds in the cotton fields in the high plains. Recently, this chemical was changed. The formula was changed so that it would last a bit longer or something like that, or that it wouldn't wash away quite as quickly, but it's seemed to have caused some damage to the grapes and potentially other crops in the Texas high plain. It mostly affects the process of photosynthesis. So you'll see the grapevines leaves cupping, and when the vines cup, their pores are closing. And so the pores can't take in carbon dioxide and then process photosynthesis. So yes, it is causing a major concern. It's not something that I could speak to a really high level, but what I can say about it is, yes, it's a challenge. The major challenge is finding something that will allow the cotton farmers to continue doing their jobs and important work, but also allow for grapevines to be growing in the Texas high plains. This is not just a concern in Texas. I mean, we're all trying to grow what we grow in whatever state or country we're in. And chemicals are necessary in the field. Organics is very, very difficult. And even in organics, non-synthetic chemicals are used in vineyards, and they can be damaging to water streams, the wrong type of crops. I mean, this is farming. Yeah, it's just farming. And I hope I'll have more information soon on what the answer is and how we've collaborated in order to make agriculture of all types successful in Texas. But yeah, it's a major concern. That's a really, really good question. Kirsten, what is worse for the vines, too hot or too cold? Too cold, because too cold and the grapes won't be able to ripen at all. You must have warmth in order to start the ripening process and get it into the end zone. And if you do not ripen your grapes, they are so highly acidic. There's no amount of decanting or food pairing that will allow you to have a non-acidic wine in too cold a climate. And your grapes need to build up sugar, because ultimately that sugar is turned into alcohol. So you will have a very low alcohol wine with very high acidity and very, very bitter herbaceous flavors if you can't ripen it fully. And worst case, in the cold, you just don't get any crop of grapes at all. And this is not just having the wrong grape variety planted. The warmth is necessary for all grapevines. So too cold, I think, would be worse. And then the frost. The frost will kill the vines. Heat will just shut them down, hopefully. Awesome. Okay. So we've covered environmental factors. Let's jump to political factors. And this is a short but really interesting discussion, at least for me. I hope it is for y'all as well. The challenge of growing grapes in Texas before 2005 was that people who were planting grapes and starting wineries could only do their thing within the borders of Texas. So this was entirely a local product, and a lot of Texas still had dry counties that didn't allow alcohol at that time, and still. So what happened in 2005 was a Senate bill passed that allowed for wine and grapes to be sold outside of the limits of Texas. This meant that we had a much wider consumer base, because the wine wasn't just going to be sold to Texans. It could then be sold outside of the state. So we had 40 wineries in Texas in 2005 and 400 in 2015. Over 10 years, 360 wineries opened their doors, and this I believe, was directly related to that Senate bill passing. So you can consider the modern era of Texas wine starting after 2005. This means that we don't have hundreds of years of growing wine behind our belt in the same way that we are now. This means that the journey has just started for us and we're learning extremely quickly. We have access to amazing growers, lots of smart people, the money to grow grapes and create an amazing product and significant economic force, but we are still young. And that's a challenge in its own right. It also means that we haven't been talking about Texas wine for actually that long, relatively. I feel like it was 2005, just last year. So we've really started to do a lot more marketing of Texas wine because, first of all, it's changing as the consumers we sell to, their palates are changing. We are changing the way that we make wine. And then finally, for political factors, labeling laws. So before last year, there were really not a lot of restrictions on how you could label wine, which means you could source grapes from outside of Texas, bring them in, and then label the wine Texas. This means that there may have been kind of a misunderstanding about what Texas wine tasted like or what was best for it. And I've even been told before that it doesn't make sense that we would make wine from our own grapes when there are such great grapes elsewhere in the world, like in Oregon or California. Why wouldn't we just outsource those grapes and slap Texas on the label so that we could make a really, really good product? And that has led to a lot of confusion. If we want to let people know what the true taste of Texas is like and also what's special about it, it means that we have to educate the consumers. We have to tell you guys why it's important. We have to tell people who are coming through the Texas Hill Country now because it's getting attention. We have to make them understand why it's important to label the wines honestly and source the grapes from inside of Texas. This also means that we've had challenges. We opened a lot of winery doors in 10 years. Where were the grapes coming from? And now that we've passed legislation that says that grapes that say Texas must have a certain amount of Texas grapes in them, making sure that there are enough Texas grapes to go around is of extreme importance. This is an additional challenge, meaning that we need to plant a lot of vineyards and it needs to be done right. Can't just plant vineyards and mass produce wine and still make an honest, homegrown, important product. It must be done smartly and kind of has to be done quickly because we're trying to make a lot more wine than we used to 10, 15 years ago. All right. Just a couple comments. Give me one moment. So Julie would like to learn about vintage variation from specific grape varieties. And then brand variation, style variation. That's a really interesting topic as well. And how different varieties from the same vineyard express the terroir. So how does limestone influence Grenache and Mourvedre? Julie, what a great collection of thoughts. So this leads me to announcing something cool that William Chris Wine Company is offering. And this is a Texas Wine Ambassador certification. We're going to offer it for the first time at the Texas Hill Country Wine Symposium. And this is an ambassador certification that prepares you to talk to others about what's important about Texas wine. And we go over literally everything that you said, what's important about the soil in Texas, vintage variation in Texas and how that affects grapes, and then style variation. So this is something that we're going to start offering in 2023. The first time we'll offer it is in January. And if you go look at the Hill Country Wine Symposium website, you will find tickets to that also. But it's something that you can look forward to seeing from us this coming year. We'll open it up first to the industry so that everyone can become wonderful, educated, professional speakers about Texas wine and what it means to make wine here, what it tastes like, and how people should be reacting to it. I love talking about all of that. And in the next couple of episodes, we'll tackle some of those topics. Great question. All right. So finally, social factors. We kind of dipped into this with environmental and political factors, but here are the social factors that are challenges for making Texas wine. Also considering that there are a lot of beneficial social factors that allow us to make wine. One of that being curious consumers who want to be educated about their wine. That's an amazing, amazing thing that we have. One challenge, I don't know if this is much social or if it's environmental, a little combination of both. Texas is in a really unique position where the majority of the wineries in Texas are centered in the Texas Hill Country. This is because partially Fredericksburg, there is an amazing city that has really interesting history and influence from other cultures. And it's a great place to go and taste wine. However, the majority of the grapes are growing in the Texas High Plains. Not too many countries or states have this same set of conditions. Australia does. Australia definitely does. Most of the grapes don't come from the place where the wine is being made or sold. In Texas, it's kind of the same. This means additional cost in transporting the grapes. It also means additional risk to the grapes. In order to make sure the grapes get from the vines to harvested all the way over to the hill country to be made, this is an additional challenge. And in order to do it without additional sulfur or chemicals, that is an additional challenge. There are a couple different ways to respond to this. Some people choose to make their wine in the Texas High Plains so that it's safe and made without being transported. Some people choose to use refrigerated trucks in order to keep the grapes cool and not spur fermentation too quickly. And this allows us to use a little bit less sulfur on the wine. Another social challenge is in the grape varieties that we are caused to work with, because there are so many challenges in the environment in growing Texas wine. Specific grape varieties must be chosen, and they are grape varieties that can stand heat, can stand the disease pressure in Texas, love rocky soil or sandy soil, limestone. All of those go into consideration. We pick these grape varieties, and the grape varieties are not necessarily recognizable. We're not necessarily working with Pinot Noir or Chardonnay on a large scale, at least. We're working with Cabernet Sauvignon, but what happens when these heat-loving, disease-resistant grape varieties are called Tannat or Mourvedre or Sagrantino or Trincadero, Dolcetto, Sangiovese? These aren't necessarily grape varieties that everyone knows. I know you guys may know some of these, but there's a big challenge in getting people to taste things that they don't recognize. How do you know that a Mourvedre is going to be something you like if you like Malbec and if you like Cabernet Sauvignon? It takes extra effort, and I mean a lot. Great marketing and things like an education department in order to tell people that you can trust us. We're making quality wine just from different grapes than you may recognize, and it's important that we do it that way. This is a huge extra lift, and I want you guys to imagine maybe a state that you've never heard of. They start making Cabernet Sauvignon and Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. They will sell all of their wine because these are very recognizable on a world scale. And you often see those words on wine bottles. What's important to us is putting the grape varieties on the wine bottles so you know what you're getting, but it can be alienating as well. And this is a challenge that we are so up to. But nevertheless, it is a challenge for the entire state and the Texas wine industry. And we've, I think, been very successful at convincing you guys to try different things. And finally, oh, Steve Martin, thanks for watching. Give me 1 second as I check out the comments. Simi Winery is really cool. I will pass that along to Chris. Oh, Christopher Ledbetter. Gotcha. All right. Finally, final social factor is a misconception about the land. So everything that we just talked about being the challenges of growing wine in Texas, all of this tends to be news to someone who's come into Texas Hill Country and is tasting wine here for the first time. The misconceptions may be that they've had a Texas wine before that they didn't like so much. That may have not been a Texas wine. It may have been grapes sourced from elsewhere that they got, and they didn't realize the grapes were sourced from elsewhere. So they actually don't know what Texas wine tastes like. Curbing these misconceptions is really, really difficult. A challenge we're up to, but we're having to win back a lot of people who don't think that the grapes can grow in the heat and we have to convince them, or they don't understand what the taste of Texas actually is, and maybe they think they do. Or maybe they came here in 2005 when we were just serving wine locally because that's all we were allowed to do. Now that we've been able to open our doors to the world and respond to wine for people that have a different palate, a really worldly palate, the wine scene has changed a lot. So there are a ton of misconceptions, and we'll probably still be curbing some of these misconceptions for the next 20 years before people really start to truly understand the identity of Texas. And this right now is what we're trying to build and shape. Us educating about Texas wine is entirely trying to give people an idea of what to picture, because it's really, really not like anything else. And if nothing else, the most common thing that I hear is take a sip of Texas wine. Wow, this doesn't taste anything like California wine. Why would it, right? It's not California wine, it's Texas wine. Totally different conditions, totally different grape varieties in some cases. Curbing that misconception is, we're excited to face that challenge, but nevertheless, it causes people to walk through doors of Texas wineries having no idea what to expect. And that is a huge, huge challenge. There is nothing to fear. All of these are challenges, and clearly we're still making wine. There are a lot of benefits to making wine in Texas, but that is a discussion for next time. So for now, I'll say goodnight to y'all. The last thing that I want to push y'all to do is go on the website and check out the couple of holiday packs that we have. We have a few specials on our sparkling pet nat, which is drinking awesome right now. It is much less fizzy than last year, so you should be able to open it without, the cap blowing off. And we have a Wines of Christmas Past pack. They are 4 wines from 2014, 2015, and 2016 that I personally tasted and are so ready to drink right now. We've held them in our cellar for, 6+ years, and they are drinking beautifully right now. The 2014 Tannat from High Estate, those were young vines, young grapes that went into that bottle. Oh my gosh, the wine is drinking so beautifully. So we bundled those 4 together. They're not going to be available outside of that, likely ever. So you can grab that. It makes a wonderful gift for the holidays, for yourself or for others. It's $2.50 for the 4-pack, and shipping is included. So go online, check those out. I want to get y'all prepared for the holidays. And if nothing less, I just want to make sure that y'all get as much Texas wine as y'all need. I will check out the comments if you had any other questions, and I'll answer them next time when we talk about sustainability and drink the Grower Project Sangiovese from the year 2020. But for now, I'll say bye. Thanks, guys, very much for joining.